what is central to our well-being is actually human connection. It's not whether you drink matcha lattes or eat chickpea blondies. That is not going to ever make you feel good. Spending time with a friend or your partner or your children and really connecting, being present. If you want to be strong, if you want to be heard, if you want to actually make a difference, you have to have your wits about you. And you can only have your wits about you if you feed your body, you nurture your body, you respect your body, and you feel strong in who you are. Because really, whatever somebody looks like, it doesn't change who they are. I always try and live my life authentically, and I always try and be honest about everything, because I just want people to realize that I don't have it sussed, and I also make a lot of mistakes. And I think it's important that I don't try and put on this pretense that I'm not fallible, because I really am.
Welcome to the Great Women Podcast. I'm Ollie.
And I'm Franny. And today we're joined by Renee McGregor, a leading sports dietitian with over 25 years of experience working in clinical and performance nutrition. She spent the first years of her working life as a clinical dietitian within the NHS, mainly in the area of paediatrics and eating disorders, before her personal love of running and sport led her to complete a postgraduate qualification in sports nutrition. Since then, Renee has worked with elite athletes at the top level, bringing her expertise to the highest levels of sport, and she is now the current nutrition lead for both the English and Scottish National Ballet.
Renee is the author of 4 best-selling books about translating evidence-based sport nutrition into real life, dismantling the harmful wellness and restrictive eating culture, and helping everyday and elite athletes fuel confidently for performance, health, and long-term resilience. Through her work, Renee empowers individuals to prioritise their health, performance and well-being without being consumed by restricted diets or unrealistic body ideals. Welcome, Renee. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. What an introduction.
It's like, and finally we get to ask some questions. To go back to the beginning of Renee McGregor, can you tell us a bit about what first pulled you towards nutrition? What was there a moment when you realised that food and health were going to be your life's work?
It's funny. I've been asked this question quite a lot over the years, and I'm going to be honest. I never set out ever to work in nutrition. I always wanted to be a writer, a journalist. Like, I love writing. That's my first passion. But I come from quite a high pressured family background, shall we say, and there was a lot of pressure to move into something more scientific. And so I didn't, this sounds terrible when I say it out loud. I mean, I was 16 when I made these choices, so I was definitely under the influence of what I guess was expected of me. And so I was pushed into doing 3 sciences at A level, which obviously then meant I probably couldn't go into writing. So I didn't hate it. It wasn't my first love, whereas English was definitely my first love. And so I did biology, chemistry and maths for A level. Didn't really know what I wanted to do with that, but I definitely knew at that point I did not want to be a doctor, even though that was what was kind of, I suppose, expected, but it was not what I wanted. So I chose a degree in biochemistry because we did this like small section of biochemistry in our biology A level, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed understanding how the human body actually works at the cellular level. Like, I'm a very curious individual. I ask a lot of questions, and I don't take anything really at face value until I've really explored it. So I suppose that's what moved me into that kind of, I just felt really like drawn to this area, and I thought, I'd quite like to know more about this. So I actually did my first undergrad degree in biochemistry and specialized in nutrition with that biochemistry degree. And then on the back of that, I guess also influenced, and I want to say this, so I want to put it out there, but also influenced by the fact that I had an eating disorder as a teenager. I was then like, okay, what can I do with this knowledge now? Like, how do I how do I make use of this? And that was when I was introduced to the world of dietetics and thought, okay, cool, I can do this. And so then I went to do a postgrad in dietetics up in Glasgow, and that then led me to my first job in the NHS. So it was it wasn't a straightforward route, and it wasn't a definite, okay, I'm going to do this. It was definitely a kind of, okay, well, I'm here, so I need to make a decision. And then I'm here and I need to make a decision. And it's more like that.
And like throughout all of that, was there always a kind of a personal love of sport, doing it yourself
Yeah.
or following it?
Yeah, I've definitely always been somebody that enjoyed being active, like through school, played netball, rounders, was terrible at running, just going to put that out there. I also did a lot of dance. Like I did a lot of what you'd call probably more like street dance. Not so people, when I say dance, people think, oh, ballet, they think contemporary. I was like, no, 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 no. It was a lot of street dance, and like I loved it. Like it was my Saturday morning pleasure. And then I moved into secondary school and continued to play netball, but also played hockey. And then I got sick. So then obviously I think was sort of pulled away from me. And I guess in a way, actually, it was my love of dance that was my motivator to get better, because I hated the fact that I couldn't do it. I was told I wasn't allowed to do it. Yeah, I guess it was a real motivator for me to get back to being part of that team, which meant so much to me. So yeah, I've always been active. I didn't actually start running until a lot later in life, when I'd had my first daughter. Yeah, moving my body, being outdoors, those are the things that I can now, obviously, as a woman who's nearly 50, I can so see how that was my way of expressing myself and feeling calm and kind of almost emotionally regulating. Whereas obviously at the time I was just like, I really like sport, and actually I'm quite good at sport, and it was just easy. It wasn't something I had to work hard at, I guess.
Going back to sort of career-wise, you were in the NHS working in paediatrics and eating disorders, but then you moved from that into sport. And then how were you suddenly then helping elite athletes and going all over the world with Olympic teams and that kind of thing?
I guess, when you work in the NHS, you work your way up a bit like a junior doctor. So you spend a lot of time doing lots of different specialities. And like you said, I ended up in pediatrics, and again had to do some further qualifications to actually be allowed to work in pediatrics, which I don't think people always appreciate, is that you don't just jump from one thing to another. There's lots of kind of hurdles that you have to overcome. And then, yeah, ended up in eating disorders. This was around, 2009-ish, 2010. I had two little girls, and they were sort of 5 and 7. And I guess I got to the point where I was like, this is really hard working in this field, and being a mum to two young girls. Like, it's very heavy working in eating disorders, as you can probably appreciate. And I was coming home and I just didn't feel I was able to sometimes put work down and be fully present for the girls. And what was really interesting for me was when my eldest daughter, Maya, was born, we moved to Bristol, and I did a bit of locuming at Bristol Children's Hospital. And there was an amazing dietitian there. And I remember her saying to me, she was actually leaving. She'd been at the Bristol Children's Hospital for a really long time, and she was leaving because her daughter was around, I think, 9, 10, something like that. And she just said to me, she goes, I just feel like I need to be there for my daughter now. She'd kind of given a lot of her time to work. And I guess Maya was like 7, 8 months at this point. So I was like, okay, well, I can't imagine feeling that. So it was really interesting that when I got to that point, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I do
remember what she said.
Yeah. And I think, I don't think she'll ever, she wasn't somebody I was very close to, but I don't think she'll ever realize that that was an impression she left on me. But I think it's important to highlight that, because particularly in present day, I think women still feel such a huge pressure to do it all. And, like I say to a lot of people I work with, regardless of whether they've got children or not, but like when you're trying to juggle these really high demanding roles, whether that's training for, something big and trying to do like a career at the same time, there are always going to be pinch points where you have to make a decision on what's your priority and what needs to give. And so for me at that time, it was like, actually, my girls were really my priority. And I was just like, I can't keep doing this. The final straw came for me when I'd been working on the ward with a particularly poorly young woman, and we'd worked together for like 5 months, and she'd got to a point where she'd done really, really well. We had a very good, trusted relationship, which had been why she'd managed to improve her nutrition and get better. And at that stage, she was discharged, as you'd expect, back out into the community. But the way in which the funding worked within the NHS, I was not the dietitian that could then continue her work with her in the community. And for me, that just felt really, really wrong, if I'm honest. And I just was like, I literally remember marching to my head of department and going, I'm done. This is the final straw for me. I am done. I said, this is not how I want to practice. I've been a dietitian for 10 years. This is not how I want to practice. This is not how I believe we can make the best of our knowledge and experience. And so at that point, I handed my notice in, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just knew that I couldn't be a dietitian in the NHS at that point. I'm going to take a bit of time to think about what I want to do. I'm going to spend some time with my kids, and I'm going to work it out. To be honest, that didn't last very long because I'm not very good at sitting still and I need to use my brain all the time. So I ended up doing a bit of private work in a local gym, and also trained to be a PT, and then was like, do you know what? I really, really want to bring both of this together. And I'd always seen the kind of masters in sports nutrition. And I always thought, do you know what? That would be something really interesting because it is something that I'm passionate about. Naively, I also thought that it would mean not having to work with people who had any problems. I say that because obviously that's not what I've ended up doing. But yeah, and that was kind of what brought me into the world of sport, was that at that point I decided to, I guess, do another degree, as you do when you've got two small children, and become a sports dietitian. And I guess the other thing is that I did get very lucky in the sense of I did my degree. I was quite well known in the local running club for running and having this kind of knowledge. So I was helping lots of local club runners, and word kind of spread and got out. And then I ended up being asked if I wanted to work with the rhythmic gymnastic team that went to London 2012, like on a wild card, because what they wanted was someone who actually was a sports dietitian, not a sports nutritionist, because they wanted somebody who had that clinical knowledge in eating disorders, but also who had that sports nutrition knowledge and kind of bring that together. So that was really where it started. And then I haven't really looked back.
Renee, can we dig into a bit? You said that you thought you were going into an arena where people wouldn't have eating disorders, and, that's not what you discovered at all. Can you kind of talk about what you did discover and how challenging it was?
Yeah, it was. So, I mean, I guess we know now, like there's some very good studies that have demonstrated the link between, the athletic population, whether that's recreational or professional, and an increased prevalence of disordered eating and worst case an eating disorder. So we know there's like lots of very good studies that have shown that association. And I guess it makes sense, right? Because if you look at the personality traits that you're working with from an athletic point of view, these individuals tend to be high achievers, perfectionistic, highly motivated, highly critical, relatively sensitive, and if you kind of look at the traits that we associate with eating disorders, they're basically the same. So it's not saying that if you're an athlete, you're definitely going to develop some sort of dysfunctional relationship with food. But I think it's understanding that if you've got that genetic predisposition and you put that disposition into the right psychosocial space, then of course there's a higher risk of dysfunctional behaviors to manifest. And I guess that's why we see this presentation and this prevalence in people who are physically very active. From a professional point of view, it's kind of 20% higher risk if you are kind of in the elite professional arena. But actually on a more kind of general recreational club runner age group type option, actually it's probably much higher, the rate of prevalence of disordered eating and also exercise dependency, which kind of fits into the same realm. So it's interesting for me because I guess, if I'm honest, Olivia, I think I actually, when I first kind of started to work with the gymnasts and could see the potential sort of risks, what I liked about this new avenue was an opportunity to prevent those things from happening. And I think that was what was different. Obviously, like when I worked in the NHS, it was very much individuals with severe eating disorders were presented to me. Whereas in this situation, I was like, okay, I can see the risk factor here, but I have an opportunity to try and mitigate this risk. And I think that's what I enjoyed. And I also really enjoyed being able to bridge that gap between clinical knowledge and sports nutrition. And I think that's why I've continued to do what I do, because I actually find it really rewarding to be able to do that. And I guess be the practitioner that I've always wanted to be.
And now, Renee, do you train, because you've now got Team Renee McGregor, which is a team of nutritionists, dietitians. Do you train them in what you have discovered to be, in your view, the best way to treat eating disorders in athletes? Is that why most people come to you, or are you getting healthy athletes as well?
I mean, we help anybody. So we have a lot of people who just want sports nutrition advice, but we are very well known for our knowledge base and experience in working, particularly in REDS, I guess, which is relative energy deficiency in sport. So I have trained up my team, and we're a team of dietitians, nutritionists, physios, and kind of mindset coaches, as well as the fact that we have an extensive network where we also work with an endocrinologist, a psychiatrist, and several psychologists. So fundamentally, over the years, what I've tried to do is build a really multidisciplinary team around me. I started looking for like-minded individuals who, again, cross that bridge between clinical and sports nutrition or sport. And there's not many of us. I'm going to be brutally honest. There are not that many people that can do both. So yeah, it's great to have my team around me. And it's also always really nice to have a sounding board, regardless of how expertise you are, regardless of how many years of experience you've had, you're always still learning. We have to work together to try and make sure that we, again, provide best practice. So yeah, that, I guess it is that. And I guess also the other thing I've been doing a lot more of recently is providing consultancy to national governing bodies and other sports organizations, particularly in the area of REDS and how you manage these very complicated individuals that are kind of almost, that they are reducing their ability to hit their potential by being caught up in these very complicated narratives in their head.
Actually, Renee, can we just talk a bit more about REDS, just for our listeners? So you've said already it's relative energy deficiency in sport. When did this become such a thing, and how does it present? And was there a negative sort of reaction when more people like you started talking about it? Was there a sort of stage of denial? What's happening with it, and how did it sort of become such a topic?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, as we said, REDS is relative energy deficiency in sport, although I would probably say REDS is relative energy deficiency, full stop. I don't think it needs to be in sport. I think it can be to anyone. And the more work I've done in this, the more I've seen that it's actually the same, I guess, the same complex presentation that we see also in obesity and what we see in like diet culture. Like it's it kind of fits the model. And what it basically is based on is when there's not sufficient energy in the body to support both biological function and daily movement. So, basically when the human body doesn't get enough energy, it will always prioritize energy for movement, and then it will start to kind of use compensatory behaviors to preserve energy in order to protect the heart, lungs, brain, to keep us alive. You could use it in any kind of scenario. Is that obviously we know in obesity, even though the movement sort of action might not be there, like the individual might not be as active as we're talking about in from a athletic or a physically active point of view, actually, if we try and create too big a deficit for that individual where we're taking their energy intake below what their body needs just to survive, then actually the same threat is generated and the same processes are generated. So it's kind of like, I think I really want to make that point really clear in what I mean. The difference, I guess, when you're looking at sport is that REDS can also be related to under recovery. So when people just don't take enough rest. And obviously this is why we see a higher percentage of people struggling, particularly in like the everyday athlete and the recreational athletes, because, if we don't have to look very far to see that the general narrative in society is we all need to move a lot to be healthy, and not even move moderately anymore. It's like we have to kind of be involved in extreme, or we have to do something on a daily basis, or we have to do something even twice a day. And it's like getting ridiculous, this kind of normalization um, of kind of overtraining to a certain degree. But REDS is a combination of these things. So it's not just about food, which I think is where a lot of people get confused. It is also about under recovery. And in terms of how it presents, is that it's a multi-system presentation. So it both has physiological and psychological aspects to it. And how it presents can be different for everybody, which I think there's a really very strong narrative around. In women, it only presents, and the one big symptom is changes to or lack of menstruation. And although that's a very key symptom, it's not the only symptom. And I think, again, I really want to kind of emphasize that point. I'm not saying that we should not ignore that symptom, but it doesn't happen for everybody. Some women will still be in REDS and actually maintain a regular menstrual cycle. And again, it's because we're also genetically different. But actually what they may present with is autoimmune type conditions or digestive issues, or more kind of psychological aspects like, increased anxiety or kind of poor mood. And so I think it's important to remember that it is a whole body system issue. So if we're thinking about the fact that we're reducing energy available, and when I talk about energy, I'm not just about food, I'm just talking about energy, that, the amount of energy we have in a day to spread across all these different things, it means that when there's not enough energy, then any biological function can be affected. And so it can present in so many different ways. You have to diagnose by exclusion.
I just want to get a sense of, we are bombarded on social media with things about, clean eating and doing more, as you say, doing more exercise, not just going to the gym twice a week, but, you've got to do it every day, blah, blah, blah. How is that influencing not only how athletes are training and reacting to, I suppose, the dissemination of too much information, but also the everyday person? How is social media changing how people eat and how people exercise?
It's having a massive, massive influence, right? Francesca and I met when I wrote orthorexia, and that was kind of felt like the advent of this situation where social media was being bombarded by a lot of misinformation and people with no appropriate qualifications giving out advice based on N=1. And that was just the start of it. And in a way that felt simple comparison to what we've got to cope with now, all these years on. It feels like that was like, oh yeah, that, I remember getting really wound up about it, but actually in comparison, I get even more wound up now. I guess what I want to say is, and I always make this point, is that obviously, as we've talked about, dysfunctional relationships with food, body, exercise are behaviors, and they're often defense mechanisms. So they're not going to show up in every single person. They're more likely to show up in people of a certain personality type, as we've already discussed. And then again, you put that personality type in this kind of psychosocial space. And so obviously the social space that's being created, the kind of social constructs and narratives that's being created by social media is obviously significantly influencing how we then perceive ourselves and view ourselves and rate ourselves, and then that impacts our behavior, right? So that is where it is definitely contributing and influencing, and I think it is hugely problematic. But I don't like to say it's the cause, because I think it's so much more complicated than that. But 100% would agree with you, Olivia, that it's a big contributing factor and one that I'm very concerned about. Because I think the other thing I would say is that as a society, very few people are using critical thinking when they're looking at all the information that is being sent their way. You know, they'll look at it and go, oh my God, that's the latest thing. That's what I've got to do now. I'm not doing it. I'm less than. I've got to work harder. You know, it kind of becomes this sort of process rather than looking at that going, how is that relevant to me? Which I think is a really important question you have to ask yourself, even if you don't ask any other question, is how is this relevant to me? But also, and I say this because I've seen something even just this morning when I was annoyingly scrolling through Instagram. And, you know, I was like, that's interesting. This is somebody who sees themselves as a professional, is apparently doing a professional study in this area. And yet I'm looking at the study design and I'm going, that's a really poor study design. But I know that a lot of runners in particular are going to go, oh, wow, this is cool. Now we've all got to do this. And I think it's very hard. Like, obviously, I appreciate I've got 3 degrees. I have a very scientific brain. I've been taught how to clinically appraise journal articles and studies. And actually, what I will say is that there are very few good studies, very, very few well-designed good studies that you can actually go, okay, this is significant. This really does make a difference. And I guess partly that is because it's actually very hard to do scientific studies to get, you know, enough people in a sample group that are exactly the same. It's in practice impossible. So I understand it, and I'm not criticizing studies or science. I'm just saying that we have to use our clinical reasoning. We have to become a little bit better at critical thinking. And I don't think social media almost allows that because it's so fast paced and people are not giving themselves enough time to stop and go, hang on a minute, is this really relevant to me as an individual? And do I need to really worry about this? And actually, do I care enough to worry about this? And the other big question I'll always say to ask yourself is, who profits from this? Me or the person who's posting?
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? You end up feeling inadequate because you can't wear a crop top with your tummy. You know, I don't have a washable tummy, let's be honest. So you end up feeling totally inadequate. You're never going to eat chickpeas every day, and you probably shouldn't, based on what you're telling us, really. I'm never going to have enough time to do all that exercise, you know. So actually, the recipe is just, I end up going, can't be bothered. But I do, you know, I have friends who have done things like celery juice diets for you know, 10 days, and you're like, that cannot be good for you.
No, not at all. And I think this is it. It's like, I don't know, I feel a bit sad, really. We make so many decisions about food based on what somebody else is telling us instead of kind of looking at the joy that comes from preference of food, right? I love the opportunity to be able to go to a restaurant, go somewhere new and feel that freedom to kind of go, oh, I'd like to try something completely different, because we all get bored of the same thing we eat day in, day out, right? And it's so nice when you try something new. Or even just like, you know, yesterday I went on a hot chocolate date with my husband, and it was just so nice to sit and chat and connect, because it's been a real, like, we only got married a month ago, but it's been so full on that we've hardly had any time to spend together. And it was just like, oh, we can breathe and we can talk and we can connect. And actually the hot chocolate was delicious, but that wasn't the point. The point was it was something we chose to do that made us feel good about the rest of our day, you know? And I just think that's what makes me sad, is that we're losing the connection with humans. And actually, wherever you read, whatever you look, and this is really, really, really well established in many, many good studies, is that what is central to our well-being is actually human connection. It's not whether you drink matcha lattes or you eat chickpea blondies. That is not going to ever make you feel good. But actually spending time with a friend or your partner or your children and really connecting, being present, watching the joy on a child's face when they first see Father Christmas, like, you know, or even just for me, spending time with my dogs who make me laugh on a daily basis, like that, you're never going to get that back ever. And I just think that's what's really sad, is that we're losing that.
that sounds a bit like something you might sort of pick up in mindfulness. And I just noticed that you had become, as well as everything else, a mindfulness practitioner. No, but I'm really interested in that. I found it really helpful with my own sort of mental health issues. And I just really like it when I see it being incorporated into not just mental health only space. And I find it really interesting if you're kind of offering that to your clients as part of the holistic sort of approach. Is that what you are doing now?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I'm going to be really honest here. Like, mindfulness was first introduced into my life probably way back, maybe 10, 11 years ago. And I kind of poo-pooed it. I was like, what is this? Which I'm quite embarrassed to say, but I will always be honest and authentic. So I was like, and actually it was probably 5 years. I think it was during COVID when I think we all took a moment to press pause and connect and decide, okay, how are we going to cope with this? And a friend of mine knew I was really struggling during COVID, was having a really tough time. And he sent me this book called Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. I read it from cover to cover. I've now read it subsequently 5 times because it's so well written and it's so helpful. When I started to kind of read Tara Brach's work and listen to her podcast, I started to realize that actually mindfulness is not about meditation. Mindfulness is about creating pause. It's about being present. It's about questioning the kind of thought processes that are going on. So, I was definitely one of those people that was always living in the future, always thinking, when I get this, I'll be happier. Or if I do this, this will happen and this will happen and this will happen. And then not realizing how those thoughts were impacting how I felt, which was then impacting my behavior. And I was kind of in this constant state of anxiety because I never felt like I was doing enough. I never felt like I was good enough. I never felt able to separate myself from this kind of, I guess, thought cloud that I constantly lived in. And I guess what mindfulness suddenly gave me was this opportunity to question everything. And again, go back to that curious mind, but question myself and go, actually, what is it that I'm believing right now? And it always came back down to the same thing. I was believing I wasn't good enough. I was believing I needed to do more. I was believing that I was kind of deficient in some way or, unworthy. And I guess a lot of that has come from my complicated family background and childhood that I've been through. But it was really interesting that I was like, oh, this is what I'm believing. And that's why I'm thinking like this. And then kind of looking at the evidence around me and going, yeah, but actually, this doesn't make sense because, I've got all these positive things going on and people are giving me good feedback about my work and I've got these amazing friends in my life. And then I think it was 2 years ago, I was like, okay, this has been so helpful for me that I can see also how I'd be able to utilize it in my practice because again, so many of my clients are doing the same and it would be really useful. So that's when I did my qualification and I actually did it under Tara Brach because there was, I was like, I really think this woman is somebody has almost become like this mentor. I don't know her, but she has become this like mentor. I want to learn because it's very much her way of mindfulness is also based on like the Buddhist practice. And I love Nepal, as you know, Francesca, and I've spent a lot of time there. And I was just like, this is very much how I want to be. I want the world to experience me is this in this way because that is very much who I am. I always try and live my life authentically and I always try and be honest about everything because I just want people to realize that I don't have it sussed and I also make a lot of mistakes. And I think it's important that I don't try and put on this kind of pretense that I'm not fallible because I really am. And I did the training and I loved it. And I've been using it ever since with clients and it's so helpful. And sometimes it's like so poignant. Like you use it at the right time in your session and you just see a complete change in someone's whole demeanor. That's been so powerful for me. So it's not the only thing I use, but it's definitely a big part of the way in which I practice, but also live my own life as well.
Rini, just hearing you talk, I just think it's just wonderful. You talk about how important it is to be honest and your own authenticity. And I think, that does come across in the way we're talking about social media earlier and all the negativity, but if there are enough authentic voices coming through from actually qualified people, then, do you feel like you are helping, or is it just you can't help but put your view out there and you slightly feel like it's falling into the ether? I just hope that you do have a slight glimmer of positivity, and that with enough of the sort of real truth getting out there, we can get away from all of this, because it's so dangerous for everyone and our children and just society.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because I remember the moment I went on social media it was after Orthorexia was published, and I was kind of like encouraged to have a presence on social media. I was living and working in this world of professional nutrition and sports nutrition, and I had no idea that this kind of online version of life existed. And I remember thinking, my God, how do I wade through this? Like, so many people are talking utter shite. How on earth do I wade through this and not let it get to me? And I remember I used to throw my phone against the wall and all sorts of things. Now what I do, just so if anyone needs this as a tip, now what I do, if I read something that irritates me, I write a counter post or copy just for myself. I don't post it, but I write a counter one. It just helps me to process and not get so angry and damage my phone. And then I put it away and I'm like, okay, it's done. That's fine. But yeah, to answer your question, Francesca, I do see that I make a difference. I don't do it for that reason. I do it because I'm very aware that not everybody can access me for financial reasons or other reasons. And I guess I want to be as accessible as I can be. And I guess my books have allowed me to do that to a certain degree, but also having this educational platform means that I can still provide content and good advice and hope that it makes a difference. But I do get messages on a daily basis from people saying, thank you so much for everything you do. And I guess that makes it worth it, because I think it's hard. I don't enjoy it. It's not a place that I'm comfortable in. I'm not the person that takes my phone everywhere and creates content. In fact, I'm so bad at it that I now have to have a social media manager who helps me because I just got too much going on. And she just despairs of me because she's like, Renee, you did that and you didn't take any photos. And I'm like, I'm really sorry. It's just not how I operate. I just don't think like that. I don't think, oh, this is self-promotion, I need to promote myself. My brain doesn't go there. Because I guess that's not what social media is about for me. It's actually about helping people. You do it because if it means that you save one person from suffering, then it's worth it.
And really, whilst we have access to you, obviously the kind of big, I suppose, fadgy trend at the moment is the fat jabs, shall we say. And we've had everyone from Jeremy Clarkson writing articles about his experience on it, etc. I think there's something bonkers, like 5 million people on them in the UK. So just wanted to get your views on the likes of the Ozempics and things like that.
So I actually wrote a Substack on this. It was my first ever Substack. So if anybody does want to read my Substack, it's called The Fuel Line. I've only written a few posts so far, but they do seem to be going well and they're quite varied. So hopefully people will enjoy them. But I guess my big concern is the lack of regulation around the use of them. And actually, again, how easy it is for people to access them who don't need it. Like, I absolutely agree. There is a population group that will benefit from being on them, under medical supervision. But I'll even say, we know, I've got lots of friends who are doctors, and even they're concerned about the fact they don't have as much advice to give the people they're putting on them in terms of when they come off it and how you also improve lifestyle factors, which is still a big part of it. And I think for me, the big worry is that the pharmaceutical industry are now hugely profiting from the vulnerable because they've provided, in their mind, an option for anybody to aesthetically change themselves. But what they haven't done is a disclaimer around how negatively it can impact health. They're now having to change a lot of policies around procedures because, one of the ways in which these GLP-1s work is that they slow the movement of food through the gut, right? So that basically then that's sending a message to the brain saying you're not hungry. But the problem is that means you've basically got a backlog of like almost 3 to 4 days worth of food in your gut, which is quite grim when you think about it. And so if you're going in for a procedure where you have to fast, 24 hours is no longer enough, right? So we're seeing huge practical problems with it. Nobody's really thought this through. It's the usual kind of, oh, look, we've got this solution for making everybody thin, and we're just going to put it out there without thinking about all the negative consequences. In the endocrine world, they're really, really worried about the implications it's going to have on bone health because, talking about REDs earlier, you're basically doing the same. You're basically inducing low energy availability in the body by putting somebody on these fat jabs because they are full, so they don't eat, they don't have an appetite. And so they then don't eat enough. And yes, they lose weight on the one hand to a certain degree, but they also end up in a place where their body turns on compensatory behaviors. And so, again, you can end up with the hormonal systems not working as well, affecting your bone health. So again, we're going to probably start seeing an increase in orthopedic problems. We're probably going to start seeing an increase in fertility problems. And I guess that's the thing, is that if you're on it medically and you're being medically supervised, that's one aspect. But if you're just choosing to buy it off the internet and, through a private prescription, and you don't need to, you're doing it because you just feel like you can't lose those last final few stubborn pounds in your head, or you feel like you'll be better accepted because you'll look a certain way. What you're not looking into, again, it goes back to that critical thinking, is that actually this also has a real negative effect on me, my psychological health and my physical health. And I have sadly had a few people message me privately just saying, this was me. I went on this thinking it was going to make my life perfect. And actually, I'm in a real mess now. And I don't know how to get out of it. So, like I said, it goes back to there's always an industry. There's always someone who's going to profit from the vulnerable. And that's what I can never get behind that, ever.
I know. Just seems to be one thing after the other with what we're thrown at, and all these basically pharmaceuticals profiting from it, which is really kind of obscene in a way, just profiting from people's insecurities about their bodies. I don't know. I just feel, and that actually brings me on to a question I really want to ask you before. So as a mother, and I'm a mother too, what is the one thing you can do as a parent to really try, because we've all got our own insecurities, to try to help our children just not have this preoccupation with what they look like?
I think it's a really, really difficult place to navigate. And I think it's a couple of things. One, obviously, is helping your child to feel safe and comfortable in who they are, which I don't, is not an easy feat, but trying to encourage them to realize what their qualities are as a human, being kind, being caring, being supportive, and really, really kind of home in on what a good human they are, and actually the value in being a good human. So you start to take away the emphasis of what someone looks like, because really, whatever somebody looks like, it doesn't change who they are. I think the other thing is, and this is probably you can do as they get a bit older, is actually demonstrating to them how making our bodies smaller makes our voices smaller as women, right? That's where this all comes from fundamentally, is the patriarchy, right? It's the way in which if we make women smaller, then they don't have enough energy, they don't have enough brain power to be present, to push back, to have a voice. And that's what I always say to my girls. If you want to be strong, if you want to be heard, if you want to actually make a difference, you have to have your wits about you. And you can only have your wits about you if you feed your body, you nurture your body, you respect your body. and you feel strong in who you are. And I will always say, I actually say this to a lot of my clients as well, a lot of young women that come in who, have real issues with their body image. And I'm like, do you really want this to be the way it continues? As I think as women, we have a huge responsibility in really championing that. And it's really hard because we've got too many celebrities and too many influencers who are still hanging on to looking a certain way and being a certain way and keeping their bodies small. But I think all we can do is kind of remind people that if we're small, we don't have a voice, and we have to push for the fact that actually our bodies are the least interesting thing about us. But what we can do and who we are and what we can say and how we change the world, that is so much more important.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you, Renee. So, Ols, should we do our usual last questions? If you could look back at younger Renee, and there was one bit of advice that you could tell her that would have really helped her at the time, what would that be, do you reckon?
I think it would be what I've just said. I think it would be believe in you, and don't try and fit into a mold, because all it will do is stifle you. And I did live that life, and I know that that's all it's ever done, has stifled me. So yeah, that was what I would tell my younger self.
I think that's incredibly well said, Renee. And we like to end on a sort of jolly note. So if you could have a cocktail, or maybe in your case, a hot chocolate, with another great woman from either today or history, who would that be?
Oh, you know what? This is so hard because there are so many amazing women in my life and amazing women that I'm grateful for historically as well. But I think actually it's somebody who is in my life. She really does make a huge difference to me as a human, and has done for a long time. And that actually is Kimberly Wilson, who is an incredible psychologist. Well, she's been a huge ray of sunshine in my life. I mean, we do see each other and we do have hot chocolates and wine, but not as much as I'd like. So
Thanks, Renee.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. We've loved having you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so lovely to see you again, and yeah, just really nice to chat. So thank you so much for having me.